art students, there is something that I forgot to mention in the previous recording. And the reason is I'd actually already told my in-person students this, and I forgot to say it again on camera. So I realized that this already has a coat on it because that is what I did on camera previously. But what I forgot to do on camera, which you definitely need to do at home, is I need to put clay underneath my rim of my plate. So what I did earlier is I took my plate off. Because my plate is so stiff, it actually held its shape. But if my plate was just a little bit more wet, it might start to sink or collapse. And so what you want to do is you want to take your old clay and you want to use that as a support underneath the plate that you've made out of clay. And so my clay is wedged because I'm pretty good about keeping my clay wedged. But if you have like little, crumbs and scraps and little pieces that look kind of like turds, this would be a good time to use those little crumbly pieces. I'm just going to break off some pieces from this wedged clay that I have. So if you don't have any scrap clay, this is fine. And so I'm just going to break off maybe about like 8 pieces. It's not really an exact number or an exact size or an exact amount. This is art class after all. So what I want you to do is I want you to, once you flipped your plate over, and I'm going to edit the video so that this is next. So you're going to flip your plate over. And the way you flipped your plate over is you took everything off, and I've shown that on camera. And then what you're going to do is you're going to actually support the edges of your plate. And so the way that you're going to support the edges of your plate is you're going to take these little scraps of clay and kind of flatten them down, and then lift up the newspaper and stick this clay in between the plastic plate. Can y'all see that? The plastic plate. And I'm sticking just like a little piece of clay and then my newspaper and just kind of setting my plate down on top of it. And so the reason I'm doing that is, let's say that when I'm adding glaze or underglaze, when I'm adding underglaze, my plate was a little bit on the wet side and it got so wet that it started to sink. I don't want that to happen. So one of the hardest parts of this process is keeping your plate exactly the right consistency the whole time. You don't want it to get too hard, because if it gets too dry and too hard, then it's going to start having issues where the edges crack. And then once your plate cracks, you can repair the crack, but it might come back in the kiln. And then the other issue that I'm dealing with here is I don't want my plate to get too wet either. So I'm kind of adding this clay as a safeguard in case it does get too wet. And look what I just did. I just squished my plate a little bit too much because it wasn't centered. So try not to do that. And let's see. It looks like I'm actually not going to use all the clay that I tore off. So anything left, I'll just end up sticking back in my bag to use on the next project. That's the cool thing about clay, you can recycle it. And you really don't want to do this step in the wrong order, because I just got a bunch of pieces of clay all over the surface of my plate that I'm now going to have to, repair and fix. So definitely do this step in the right order. Don't forget it like I did. And now we're going to move on to me talking about your sketchbook. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is our designs. So you've got it drawn out in your sketchbook and colored, so we know what colors we're going to use. And I'm actually going to use the same color purple, even though it looks like 2 different purples in my sketchbook. So I have black underglaze and I have purple underglaze. Do I need white underglaze? No, why not?
The plate's already going to be white.
Because the clay's already going to turn white. Okay, and then I like these fan brushes because they cover a large area, but if you need to do details, we've got like these more detailed brushes as well. If I run out of fan brushes, these work almost as well because they're pretty wide and flat. So these are nice too. So I would grab one of each brush so that you're ready. Okay, so I've got this right here. And so I want to think about which color should I put down first, or what should my first step be? So what do I want to do to keep the white area white?
Probably black first, or put something over it.
Put something over it. So I'm gonna mask this area. So step one for me is gonna be to mask the white heart. So you need to think through like what your design's gonna be. And I write it down because I'm forgetful and this takes several days, okay? All right, then what color should I do next? If I start with the lightest color, should I do purple or black next?
Black.
Purple.
That's what I said.
All right, purple because it's going to be kind of lighter than black. So if I make a mistake with the purple, I can cover it up with the black. If I make a mistake with the black, I got to like carve it off and start over and like wipe it. So like look right here. Can y'all see where I made like a little mistake where I dripped it on there and I didn't wipe it off all the way, and I tried to fix it a little bit and you can still see it. So if you make a mistake with black, you can't really fix it. So I would do that last. All right, so step two is going to be to paint my whole plate purple. How many coats do I do?
3.
3. So I'm going to have to do that 3 times. So step 2 is 3 times, okay? Then what do I do last? Do the black. So what am I going to do to keep these areas purple? Mask them. So I need to mask the purple areas. Then last I'm gonna paint my whole plate black. Okay, now the only exception to the rule is maybe with black I can only do it 2 times and it might be dark enough, but I'm just gonna write down 3 times, and then if I'm doing it and after, you know, the second coat is dark enough, then I'll stop. Okay, does that kind of help clear up a little bit of your questions about the underglaze? Okay, so I'm using masking and I'm doing 2 different colors. If you are doing a stencil, you've got to think about it slightly differently. So before you start, I would think about what colors are lightest, darkest, and which order you should go in, okay? All right, and then we're just gonna walk through the steps for today. You will not finish all of this in one day. So I'm gonna take my plate and flip it over. And you wanna make sure, just like it's holding its form right now, that it's holding its form. Then take your plastic plate, put that down the right way first. Put your newspaper down second. My newspaper is a little bit wet, so I could stand to replace it, but for the video, I'm just gonna keep going. Then I'm gonna put my plate down in the center. And if you look, can y'all see how I've got like a little indentation? If you have that, and my indention's not even centered, so it looks like awful. So I'm definitely gonna spend some time smoothing my plate before I do the next step, okay? So what am I using to smooth right now?
Your finger.
My finger. Why am I not using a sponge if a sponge is easier? Because it's gonna make my plate wet, and then my plate is gonna sink, and then I'm gonna be like back at step, you know, yesterday. All right, so I'm gonna just smooth it with my finger until it is good. Really focusing on this area. If I need to break out a rib and work with it dry, I can do that.
Got a little crumb on your side. No, like on the plate.
On the plate, like here?
Oh, no, on the other side.
Right here? That one?
Right above it, like on the top. Yeah, that right there.
There we go. Okay, thank you,
It was bothering me.
You got OCD like me. All right, so once I've got it pretty good, like some of these little tiny mistakes or like spots, if it's not big enough for me to see pretty easily, guess what? Underglaze is clay, so it's gonna smooth it just a little bit. Not a lot, but a little bit. You guys with me on that? Okay, the next thing I need to be mindful of is that the edges, either paint them or don't paint them, but don't halfway paint them. Paint them or don't paint them, but don't let some drip over the edge and then leave it, okay? If some drips over the edge, I usually try to leave it all on the surface of the plate, and then eventually something drips over the edge and I just paint it.
If a little tiny bit drips just in one area, you can take your loop tool and you can just scrape it off that area when it dries, okay? So that's all fixable, but look, most people end up doing the edge because like it gets on the edge. All right, then what I'm gonna do is take my little stencil that I've already made, and y'all are gonna make that after this. And I'm gonna put, see I've got, for me I was gonna do stenciling, but then I changed my mind at the last minute. So I'm gonna mask my little baby heart in the center. And see how it's not wanting to stick? I can just spray it with some water, the paper, and then it should stick pretty good. But I really just wanna make sure that the edges are down really good so that the underglaze doesn't get underneath it. And the underglaze can kind of help it stick down the rest of the way. Okay, and then I have this, but I'm gonna use this for the next step, so I'm just gonna save it and cut it in half and use it. Okay, well, not black, purple. All right, so make sure you shake your underglaze. Messy. All right, and for those of you at home, you do not need to work on your wear board, the canvas covered board for this, because you're just gonna get underglaze on it for no reason, and then you'll have a mess, and that color will get in your clay. So my whole table is like that, but if I was a student working at a student table, I would just have my plate and my newspaper, because the newspaper is gonna catch your mess. You don't need to put your board underneath it when you're painting. Okay, and then I'm just gonna paint the whole thing, and it looks patchy right now, and that's okay, because that's why I'm gonna do so many different coats. I wanna be mindful of my brush strokes because you are gonna see those. So I'm gonna try to paint everything the same direction. And unlike paint, where like you get a lot of like time to smooth it, you know, like you get to like keep going with paint usually, glaze is not like that. So I'm kind of just slopping it on there and then like dragging it across the surface of my plate to kind of add layers. So think of it like that. Did I get it over the edge right there? Yeah. I did. So see, now I'm just gonna decide that I'm gonna paint the edges, but I'm gonna paint them black. So I'm just gonna let the purple do what it does. All right, and then that is layer one, and I have to wait until this is not shiny anymore to add layer two. All right, any questions? You feel good? All right, thank you very much.
So now what we're going to talk about is doing your next coat of clay slip or underglaze. So if you look at my plate right here, it is just exactly the way that I left it. And the good thing about working from home and the nice thing about me being in my classroom all day is I can just let this sit out, and then when it's not shiny anymore, I can just add another coat. In the classroom, because we have, 75-minute to 90-minute classes, you have to work on this for many days. You have to wrap it. Sometimes that messes it up. And so you're having to struggle more with the whole babysitting process when you're actually in the classroom. So being at home, it makes this underglaze a whole lot easier to deal with. So if you look, when I pick up my plate, it's not really reflecting the fluorescent lights in my classroom anymore. And that's because it is matte, because it is dry. I can also touch it with my finger and I don't get underglaze on my hand. So that means that this is dry enough. This is now leather hard and it's bonded to the clay that's underneath it. And so I can add another layer. So I'm gonna take my underglaze and I'm gonna find my brush. And another thing is I've been letting this brush sit out for about 2 hours. So the brush has actually dried, but unlike paint, where if I had done this with paint, I would have ruined the brush. And if you had done that to my paintbrush, I would have been extremely upset with you. But the nice thing about glaze and ceramic material is that it's just dirt. And so if I dip this back in the glaze and stir it a few times, it's gonna kind of reactivate the underglaze that's already on that brush. And now, you can see my brush is not hard anymore. So I kind of like that. You're not wasting as much as you do with acrylic paint that's going to dry as soon as it's out of the bottle. All right, so the first time I went this direction with my paint strokes because my heart is going that way. So I'm going to go the opposite direction on this layer. And remember, I'm going to put black on my design. is my sketch from earlier. So I'm not really worried about painting the edges yet because I think I'm just gonna paint all my edges black. You either need to paint the edges or not paint the edges, but because I got some on the edge earlier, I'm going to end up painting my edges, but I think I'm going to paint them black. And that's kind of the nice thing about being in art class is I can make those kind of decisions on the fly. So I do make y'all do a lot of planning because I feel like planning makes you more successful as an artist. But then another component of being an artist is being able to kind of go with the flow and deal with, you know, problems and working through possible failures and still coming up with a positive outcome. Okay, so it looks like I have my second layer and I just fixed my brush stroke so it was nice and even because in a couple areas the glaze is a little bit thicker, so I want to kind of even that out. And then I'm going to let this sit and dry. Once I have let this dry, I'm actually going to do another coat of the purple, and then it's going to be ready for me to do a different color, but it is 3 o'clock on a Friday.